The emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone lines at exactly 3:47 on that Tuesday afternoon. 911. What's your emergency? Karen Mitchell gripped her iPhone with trembling fingers, her voice pitched high with manufactured panic. There's a gang leader at Jefferson High School organizing violence. He's using hand signals to coordinate with other gang members. They're planning something terrible. Her words tumbled out in a breathless rush, each syllable carefully calculated to paint the most damaging picture possible. 2 miles away, Marcus Williams sat quietly in the school library, his fingers dancing through the air as he explained calculus concepts to his study group. The 17-year-old had been deaf since birth, but his brilliant mind had never let that define his limitations. His hands moved with fluid grace, translating complex mathematical equations into American Sign Language for 3 other students who were struggling with their homework. The afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden tables where textbooks lay open and pencils scratched against notebook paper. See? The derivative of this function follows the chain rule. Marcus signed, his dark eyes lighting up with the joy of teaching. His study partner Sarah nodded eagerly, finally grasping the concept that had eluded her for weeks. Marcus had always been patient, always willing to help his classmates understand difficult material. Teachers praised his leadership qualities and his ability to bring out the best in other students. He volunteered at the local community center, teaching sign language to families with deaf children, and had already been accepted to 3 prestigious universities with full scholarships. Karen Mitchell had been watching from across the library for 20 minutes. Her pale blue eyes narrowed with suspicion and something darker. She had transferred her daughter Brittany to Jefferson High just 2 months ago, and from the first day, she had fixated on Marcus with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every time she saw him signing, she convinced herself he was plotting something sinister. Every time other students gathered around him, she imagined criminal conspiracies taking shape. Her paranoia had been growing like a malignant tumor, fed by her own prejudices and fears of anything she didn't understand. The police dispatcher's keyboard clicked rapidly as Karen continued her fabricated report. He's the ringleader. I've been watching him for weeks. He uses those hand gestures to communicate with his gang members. They're planning to attack during the school assembly tomorrow. You need to send units immediately. The dispatcher, trained to take all threats seriously, began coordinating the response even as doubt crept into her voice. She had handled thousands of emergency calls, and something about this woman's tone set off alarm bells in her experienced mind. Within minutes, 3 patrol cars were racing toward Jefferson High School, their sirens wailing through the quiet suburban streets. Officer Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with 2 deaf cousins, frowned as he listened to the dispatch details over his radio. The description of gang hand signals sounded suspiciously like sign language to his trained ear, but protocol demanded he treat every threat assessment with maximum seriousness. His partner, Officer Stevens, was newer to the force and had already formed conclusions based on the dispatcher's urgent tone and Karen's vivid descriptions. Marcus felt the vibrations through the library floor before he saw the flashing lights through the windows. The sudden tension in the room was palpable as students looked around nervously, whispering among themselves about what could be happening. Sarah tapped Marcus on the shoulder and pointed toward the windows where red and blue lights painted the walls in alternating colors. His stomach dropped as he realized the police cars were stopping directly in front of their building. Principal Henderson's voice echoed through the intercom system, announcing an immediate lockdown. All students and staff remain in your current locations. Do not leave classrooms or common areas until further notice. The words sent a chill through the library as students huddled together, fear replacing the earlier atmosphere of focused study. Marcus's hands moved quickly as he signed to his friends, trying to reassure them, even as his own heart pounded with anxiety. Karen Mitchell positioned herself strategically near the main entrance, ready to point out her target to the arriving officers. She had spent the morning perfecting her story, adding details about suspicious meetings and coded conversations that existed only in her imagination. Her daughter Brittany stood beside her, shifting uncomfortably as she recognized the cruel satisfaction in her mother's expression. Brittany had tried multiple times to explain that Marcus was just a helpful student who had tutored her in chemistry. But Karen dismissed these protests as naive misunderstanding. The library doors burst open with a force that made every student jump. Officer Stevens entered first, his hand resting on his weapon as he scanned the room with suspicious eyes. Officer Rodriguez followed more cautiously, his experience telling him that something didn't add up about this situation. The students sat frozen at their tables, textbooks still open, pencils still clutched in nervous fingers. The silence was deafening, except for the quiet sobbing of a freshman girl who had never seen police officers in her school before. "Which one is Marcus Williams?" Officer Stevens demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Several students instinctively looked toward Marcus, who was sitting perfectly still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. He couldn't hear the officer's words, but the hostile body language and aggressive posture made the situation crystal clear. Sarah stood up shakily, attempting to explain that Marcus was deaf and couldn't understand what was happening. But her words were lost in the chaos that followed. Officer Stevens approached Marcus with swift, aggressive movements that spoke of predetermined guilt rather than investigative caution. "Stand up and put your hands where I can see them," he shouted, even as Marcus remained seated, unaware of the verbal commands. The officer's frustration escalated quickly, interpreting Marcus's lack of response as defiance rather than disability. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, trying to communicate through gestures, but the situation had already spiraled beyond his control. The next 60 seconds unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Officer Stevens grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and yanked him upright, causing the teenager to stumble and instinctively raise his hands to maintain balance. The officer misinterpreted this natural movement as resistance, and within moments, Marcus found himself face down on the library floor, with his hands zip-tied behind his back. Students screamed as they witnessed their friend being treated like a violent criminal, their voices creating a cacophony of protest and disbelief. Sarah frantically tried to explain the misunderstanding to Officer Rodriguez, her words tumbling over each other in desperate urgency. "He's deaf. He can't hear you. He was just studying with us. He's not in any gang." But the officers were already following protocol for a suspected gang leader, treating Marcus as a dangerous threat to school safety. The 17-year-old lay motionless on the cold linoleum floor, his face pressed against the ground, confusion and terror evident in his dark eyes. Karen Mitchell watched through the library windows with savage satisfaction, convinced that she had prevented a terrible tragedy. She approached Officer Rodriguez with theatrical concern, her voice dripping with false worry as she provided additional evidence of Marcus's criminal activities. "I've seen him meeting with known troublemakers behind the gymnasium. They use those hand signals to coordinate their activities. I have a daughter here, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't speak up." Her words were carefully crafted to sound like those of a concerned parent, rather than a prejudiced woman driven by irrational hatred. The news of Marcus's arrest spread through Jefferson High School like wildfire, carried by text messages and social media posts that painted a picture of gross injustice. Students who knew Marcus personally were outraged by the accusations, while others began organizing an immediate response to what they recognized as blatant discrimination. The school's Disability Rights Club, which Marcus had helped establish 2 years earlier, called an emergency meeting to plan their next steps. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the school's special education coordinator and Marcus's longtime advocate, arrived at the police station within an hour of his arrest. She brought with her a folder thick with documentation of Marcus's academic achievements, volunteer work, and leadership activities. Her voice shook with controlled anger as she demanded to speak with the arresting officers, armed with evidence that would demolish Karen's fabricated narrative. This young man has never been in trouble in his life. He's the president of the National Honor Society and has been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. The holding cell at the downtown police station was a stark, concrete cube that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Marcus sat on the narrow bench, his hands still zip-tied behind his back, despite repeated requests from Dr. Chen for humane treatment. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him, couldn't comprehend how a normal afternoon of studying had transformed into this waking nightmare. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything look cold and unwelcoming. Meanwhile, Karen Mitchell was giving a detailed statement to Detective Williams, embellishing her story with each retelling. She described elaborate gang symbols that existed only in her imagination, secret meetings that had never occurred, and threatening behavior that contradicted everything Marcus's teachers and classmates knew about him. The detective listened with growing skepticism, his 25 years of experience helping him recognize the difference between genuine concern and malicious fabrication. By evening, Jefferson High School students had organized themselves into a formidable force for justice. The Disability Rights Club had joined forces with the student government, the debate team, and various cultural organizations to plan a peaceful march for the following morning. They created signs demanding Marcus's release, drafted a petition highlighting the discrimination he had faced, and contacted local news stations to ensure media coverage of their demonstration. Sarah Martinez, Marcus's closest friend and study partner, stood before the assembled crowd of over 200 students, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. Marcus Williams is not a gang member. He's not a threat to anyone. He's a brilliant, kind, generous person who has spent years helping other students succeed. What happened to him today is wrong, and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Her words resonated through the school auditorium, sparking applause and determined nods from students who had witnessed the injustice firsthand. The march began at dawn, with students filing out of Jefferson High School in organized rows, their colorful signs held high against the morning sky. Justice for Marcus. Deaf rights are human rights. And end police brutality were among the messages that caught the attention of passing motorists and early morning commuters. The students moved with quiet dignity, their peaceful demonstration a stark contrast to the violent gang activity Karen had described in her false report. Officer Stevens and 5 additional officers arrived at the march site with riot gear and aggressive intentions, apparently expecting the violent confrontation that Karen had predicted. The sight of heavily armed police facing peaceful high school students created an immediate and volatile situation. The students linked arms and began singing, "We Shall Overcome," their voices rising in harmony despite the intimidating presence of law enforcement personnel, who seemed determined to prove Karen's fabricated warnings correct. The first act of violence came when Officer Stevens grabbed a student's sign and threw it to the ground, claiming it constituted a weapon. The 18-year-old girl who had been carrying the sign began to cry, prompting other students to move protectively around her. This natural protective instinct was immediately interpreted as aggressive mob behavior by officers who had been primed to expect gang violence. Within moments, the peaceful demonstration had devolved into chaos as police began using batons and pepper spray against teenagers whose only crime was demanding justice for their friend. Video footage captured by dozens of smartphones showed the horrific reality of what happened next. Students were beaten with batons for attempting to help fallen classmates. Pepper spray was deployed indiscriminately. affecting not only protesters, but also innocent bystanders who had simply been walking to work. A 14-year-old freshman was tackled to the ground and handcuffed for the crime of asking an officer why her friends were being arrested. The images that flooded social media within hours painted a damning picture of police brutality against children. Dr. Chen arrived at the march just as the violence was escalating, her medical training immediately recognizing the severity of injuries being inflicted on the students. She began treating pepper spray victims with water bottles and providing first aid to those who had been struck by batons, all while documenting the excessive force being used against peaceful protesters. Her presence as a respected adult witness would later prove crucial in legal proceedings against both the officers and Karen Mitchell. Karen Mitchell watched the news coverage from her living room that evening, a cold smile playing across her lips as she saw images of students being arrested and injured. She felt vindicated by the violence, convinced that it proved her accusations about gang activity had been correct all along. She called local news stations to offer additional commentary, describing the march as exactly the kind of organized criminal behavior she had warned authorities about. Her daughter Brittany sat in horrified silence, finally understanding the full extent of her mother's cruelty. The breakthrough in Marcus's case came from an unexpected source. Detective Williams had spent the day reviewing security footage from Jefferson High School, trying to corroborate Karen's claims about gang meetings and suspicious activity. What he found instead was hour after hour of footage, showing Marcus engaged in normal student activities, studying in the library, volunteering in the special education classroom, tutoring struggling classmates, and participating in National Honor Society meetings. There was no evidence of gang affiliation, no suspicious meetings, no threatening behavior of any kind. More damaging to Karen's credibility was the discovery of her own behavior on the security footage. The cameras had captured her stalking Marcus through school hallways, photographing him without permission, and following him to various activities while maintaining careful distance. Her obsessive surveillance of an innocent teenager painted a disturbing picture of harassment and potentially criminal behavior. Detective Williams realized he had been investigating the wrong person entirely. The bodycam footage from Officer Rodriguez proved to be the final nail in Karen's coffin. Unlike his partner, Rodriguez had kept his camera running throughout the entire incident, capturing not only the arrest, but also Karen's coaching of other officers about Marcus's supposed criminal activities. The footage showed her pointing out specific students as gang associates and describing elaborate criminal plots that had no basis in reality. Her voice could be heard clearly encouraging more aggressive tactics against teenagers who were obviously innocent of any wrongdoing. Marcus was released from custody after 18 hours in jail, but the damage to his reputation and psychological well-being was already severe. He had missed his scheduled interview with MIT's admissions committee, and news reports about his arrest had been picked up by college admissions monitoring services. Dr. Chen immediately began damage control, contacting universities and scholarship committees to explain the circumstances of his arrest and provide documentation of his true character and achievements. The community response to the bodycam footage was swift and furious. Parents who had initially supported Karen's actions based on media reports now realized they had been manipulated by a disturbed woman with personal vendettas against disabled students. The school board called an emergency meeting to address the crisis, while the police department launched an internal investigation into the officers' conduct during both the arrest and the subsequent march violence. Karen Mitchell's world began crumbling within 72 hours of her initial phone call. Her employer, a local insurance company, terminated her employment after receiving hundreds of complaints from customers who had seen her on television defending the brutal treatment of peaceful student protesters. Her neighbors, many of whom had children at Jefferson High School, began avoiding her family entirely. Vandals spray-painted "liar" across her garage door, and threatening messages filled her voicemail inbox around the clock. The legal consequences came swiftly. District Attorney Patricia Morgan announced that Karen Mitchell would be charged with filing false police reports, harassment, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The charges carried potential prison sentences totaling up to 15 years, along with substantial financial penalties. More importantly for Marcus and his family, the DA's office filed civil rights violation charges that could result in federal prosecution and significant monetary damages. Officer Stevens faced immediate suspension without pay, pending a full investigation into his conduct. The video evidence showed clear violations of department policy regarding the treatment of disabled suspects and the use of excessive force against peaceful protesters. Internal Affairs investigators discovered a pattern of similar complaints against Stevens spanning several years, suggesting that his treatment of Marcus was part of a broader pattern of discriminatory policing practices. The students of Jefferson High School organized a second march 2 weeks later, this time with proper permits and police protection. Marcus stood at the front of the crowd, his hands moving gracefully as he addressed the assembled protesters through an interpreter. "What happened to me could happen to anyone who is different, anyone who doesn't fit someone else's narrow definition of normal. But you have shown me that good people will always stand up against injustice, and that gives me hope for our future." His words brought tears to many eyes and renewed determination to fight against discrimination in all its forms. The civil trial against Karen Mitchell became a media sensation, with disability rights advocates attending every session to support Marcus and his family. Karen's defense attorney attempted to portray her as a concerned parent who had made an honest mistake, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Text messages recovered from her phone showed months of planning to get rid of Marcus, including research into gang activity and police response protocols. Her obsessive documentation of his daily activities revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even seasoned legal observers. During her testimony, Karen finally revealed the true motivation behind her actions. Her own brother had been born with developmental disabilities, and their parents had devoted most of their attention and resources to his care throughout their childhood. Karen had grown up feeling neglected and resentful, developing a deep-seated hatred for anyone who received what she perceived as special treatment or accommodation. Marcus's academic success and popularity had triggered memories of childhood jealousy and inadequacy that she had never properly addressed. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict that held Karen Mitchell liable for damages totaling $2 million. The money would pay for Marcus's college education, provide counseling for the students who had been traumatized by the police violence, and fund new disability awareness programs in the school district. Karen's house was placed in foreclosure to pay the judgment, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes against Marcus and the student protesters. Marcus Williams graduated as valedictorian of Jefferson High School's class, delivering a speech about overcoming adversity and the power of community support. MIT had not only reinstated his scholarship, but had also created a new program for disabled students inspired by his experience. The university's president attended his graduation ceremony, personally apologizing for the institution's initial reaction to his arrest and promising that no student would ever again be penalized for being the victim of discrimination. The Jefferson High School District implemented comprehensive reforms in response to the crisis, including mandatory disability awareness training for all staff members and new protocols for handling police interactions with disabled students. A scholarship fund established in Marcus's name provided financial assistance to disabled students pursuing higher education, ensuring that his traumatic experience would ultimately benefit countless other young people facing similar challenges in their educational journeys. Officer Stevens was terminated from the police force and subsequently convicted of civil rights violations in federal court. His sentence included 2 years in prison and permanent prohibition from law enforcement employment. Officer Rodriguez, whose bodycam footage had helped expose the truth, was promoted to detective and became a departmental trainer specializing in disability awareness and de-escalation techniques. His courage in preserving evidence despite pressure from colleagues earned him recognition from civil rights organizations nationwide. 5 years later, Dr. Marcus Williams returned to Jefferson High School as a guest speaker for the annual Disability Rights Awareness Week. He had completed his undergraduate degree at MIT with highest honors and was pursuing a doctorate in educational technology designed to help disabled students access higher education. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and community members who wanted to hear from the young man whose courage had transformed their community's approach to disability rights and police accountability. Standing at the podium, where he had once been falsely accused of gang leadership, Marcus signed his closing words to an audience that now included dozens of sign language interpreters and students who had learned ASL specifically to communicate with disabled classmates. Karen Mitchell tried to destroy my life because she couldn't understand my difference. But she failed because this community chose love over fear, truth over prejudice, and justice over convenience. That choice made all the difference. Not just for me, but for every student who will walk these halls in the years to come. The standing ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes, a testament to the healing power of truth and the enduring strength of communities united in the pursuit of justice for all their members.